Hey guys, I hope everybody is having a happy Labor Day weekend, getting some time out in the sun, the last real weekend of the summer, for holidays and, people traveling and having a good time before, September kicks in. A lot of schools are back in already, and some of the schools in the Northeast are just getting back in after the holiday. So I hope everybody's had a chance to enjoy this weekend. I know I have. I wanted to take some time though because I'll be out of town this week myself and may not be putting out too many videos, if any. Um, that I want to give a few minutes to some of the trades that we talked about on Friday, for Friday rather, and also just kind of review some of the positions that I currently have on myself from last week, and some things I'm looking for going into next week for potential trades. So here's just the S&P 500 cash market. This is the activity from Friday. You can see it's just had after the all-time high up here around 2916.50. It's just consolidating a little bit. It's come down, making a little bit of a V pattern here, but nothing major. It's still quite choppy. And after the liquidation break on Thursday, after that news about some tariffs with China, some additional tariffs with China, we've just kind of really chopped around and made a bit of a doji pattern in the candlesticks on Friday's daily chart. So, it's still pretty bullish. As you can see, we're still above the prior all-time high, and we've gapped up, and we're still in this little island area up here. So we'll continue to watch for some strength. It was a pretty neutral day, so we had the opportunity to take a couple of different types of trades if we wanted, right? So there wasn't any real strength in the market or real weakness. So momentum trades, for example, like earnings trades, could work either way because there was not really any clear direction in the market. So we talked about a few trades that were potentials, and some of them worked out and others did not, and that's just the nature of earnings. It's a binary event, and things can happen, news can drive it one way or another, and stocks are very susceptible around this time to upgrades, downgrades, price target changes, and news. So we'll talk about a couple of things that happened for these stocks that we mentioned on Friday, before Friday, I think Thursday night for Friday earnings, and some trades that I took as well. Okay, so first of all was Lulu. Lululemon, we talked about the extraordinary strength it had shown in the overnight on Thursday. It got all the way up to 149 in the overnight prior to the pre-market on Friday. You can see in the pre-market it gapped up a little bit more, and I think the high was around here at 153, almost 153 exactly was the high in the overnight. So I think we talked about the fact that Lulu's pretty bullish, and that we would take a trade off the open if it continued to show some strength. So and we had some Fibonacci retracements that we had put in place, and I will say these are different Fibonacci's because I changed the lines to show to include the morning trade. So I changed this after I had seen the action in the morning. Now, I mean, if you would have kept it, in fact, I actually want to keep it because I had most of the day. I had it most of the morning. I had this on for the extensions that we had talked about on Thursday's video. So let me see if I can get that to show, so I can show you where we were prior to the open, and some of the lines that we had drawn for targets on Lulu. If I could get this chart to work. Okay. So I had taken this and put it, sorry guys. Okay. I had the top of this Fibonacci retracement or extension was at 149. It was like right around 149. And it's not exact, so we'll just use that. So we had talked about the targets of around 150, 170, and about 156, like up here around 156.24, and then 150, 179-ish as targets potentially, right? So in the morning, this is what I had on. And I had, I'll just show you the 1 minute chart and kind of where those targets were based on the chart that I was seeing in the morning when I took my trade. So with Lulu, if you take a look at the first 5 minute bar, okay, right here, we had an entry point at this into Lulu. We took a trade on Lulu first thing in the morning. Actually, it was a 1 minute bar. So here's the first 1 minute bar, and the trade was above, right where this arrow is. We entered a trade long Lulu right here with a stop at the low of the day, right? So the first 1 minute bar. Here was the stop down here, 153, entry point here at 154.92. So the first target was the 61% extension from the overnight movement, which is what we had talked about as a potential target on Lulu. We also have, okay, let me just move it to the 5 minute now. And then we'll talk about where we got out and why. So, once it moved up above this 161 extension, we held it because it had volume down here. You can see the volume, and it was a pretty strong up move. The stop was still going to be 153, for today, regardless. And of course, any kind of change in chart pattern, we would decide on whether we wanted to sell at that time. So Lulu continued to show some strength and right off the open the first half hour or so, and then it started consolidating right around this. I mean, it came down to this line again where was our first target, and it kind of consolidated and retraced and started coming back up. Not retraced, but resumed the upside move. It went all the way up close to the 160 level, which is again a psychological level based on it being an even number, round number. And so at the weakness up here, you can see it showed a little weakness. You have kind of a secure high right here. If you zoom in on this, you got a little bit of a secure high here, and then it never made it back up, to even either of these bars on either side. So the stock started to come back up again, but it was a lower high. So at this lower high, we had to make a decision because we could either retain our profits or we could try to hold the stock. So on you can see this is a 15-minute chart now. So as it started, if you take a look at it, the first red bar that was made on the 15-minute chart, and it corresponds with this 5-minute chart as well. Sorry, I'm not having a good time with the charts today. Right here. So this is actually really where the decision was made by me to get out of this trade. This one big red bar, excuse me, to the downside after this lower high here that it made. Here's the high, lower high, lower high. Actually, this is just a breakdown, not really a lower high. But you can see here that this lower high kind of made my decision for me. So I decided that I would get out of this trade if it didn't resume to the upside, and then it just started tanking. So on the move of this bar here, I decided to just wait to see the next 5-minute bar and see what kind of action it had, because it could have just been a temporary liquidation. And so once the bar once the next 5-minute bar closed kind of in this, doji type pattern, I decided to go ahead and get out of the trade over here in this area. So you can see the arrow, and I'm sorry to confuse you with these arrows, but that was just trying to show the lower highs it made. Excuse me. We got out of this trade right in this area here. I believe, and again, we bought it down here, and we bought a call. We didn't buy the stock outright. I bought a weekly call, so not Fridays, but next week, September 7th, call option at the one. We always buy 70 to 90 delta calls. So we bought the 80-ish delta call and got a good profit on it. So between 154 and 158, pretty decent profit even on an 80 delta call. So bought and sold the call the same day because Lulu is such a high momentum stock. I was not intending on holding any trade in Lulu overnight and over the weekend because it is already at like astronomical, stratospheric levels as it is. So just wanted to take a quick trade on it. Like we talked about on Thursday's video, it was going to gap up and probably continue some momentum based on earnings. And that's what we wanted to capture. We could have probably gotten out of it here at our target level, or at least as it started coming down. But I decided to just give it a little bit more room because it did just kind of shoot straight up, and it could easily have come down and consolidate and then go back up, which is what it did. And so we wanted to give it a little time. And actually, if you put let's see, 20 moving average on there instead of the 50, you can see that it actually, this is so hard. That it actually never, it kind of followed this moving average throughout the day. And I'm having a really hard time. Okay, there we go. So you can see this is a much better, because on my charts that I utilize for my daily trading, I have a 9 moving average, a 20 moving average, a 50 moving average, and a 100 moving average locked on my studies. But I didn't want to confuse the charts. I like to keep them clean when I'm talking about them with you guys. But this is actually what was on my screen when I was trading that day. So you can see it made it down here to the 20 and bounced, which is what I was looking for. If it broke the 20, of course, that's bearish, and I probably would have gotten out right here. But it literally just tapped it and started going back up again. Tapped it, and tapped it, didn't even make it here. Tapped it, and then broke it. And that's where we got out, and that's what the decision was made on. Of course, this red bar, lower high, as well as breaking the 20 moving average. And so that was LULU, and that's a trade that we took on LULU. And it actually, I didn't notice because I didn't really follow it the rest of the day, but it did kind of break down from that level, never really regained the 20 moving average, and has shown weakness into the close on Friday. And you can see this bar is actually shooting star or topping tail type of pattern. So pretty okay timing on LULU. This really shows the importance of utilizing moving averages when you're trading intraday even. It works on all time frames really. So if you have a particular moving average that a stock is showing support or resistance at, based on if you're long or short, you use that as your targets, especially on a stock like this, which really doesn't have pivots or any kind of indicators to the upside when it's moving super high and super fast. You have to figure something out, which is why we pick these extension levels, and then of course why we then go back to using a moving average. So that is LULU. I know that was a long-winded version of it, so thanks for your patience. After LULU, we talked about AOBC, which is American Outdoor Brands. You can see here, AOBC, we did talk about it having some strength in the, potentially if it had some strength in the open, on the open, that we would trade it up to that 1335 level, unless it broke through that level with some volume. So we actually did take a trade on AOBC above the first 5-minute high. Actually, not the first 5-minute high, but the second 5-minute high, because this first bar was like super choppy. So waited to the second 5-minute high and entered this trade right here at 12:59. So entered the trade at 12:59. It actually did hit right at our target, which is where I sold half of my position, because I usually sell half at the target, especially if it's one that taps so beautifully. My stop was break even, so my stop after selling half at 1335 was down here at 1260, which is where 1259 where I entered. So break even would have been my stop if it got back there. It did not. It held pretty well up here after this retracement consolidation, and continued up higher. Actually continuing through the 1335 level, and you can see on higher volume, this bar here corresponds with that green bar up above 1335. So I held it a little longer, and I actually ended up getting out right here on this second red bar after the push up. And I honestly, I could have held it longer. I probably got out way too early. As I'm looking at the overnight, I definitely got out way too early, missing out on almost $1 of profit there. And I could have held it for a longer swing trade, because it's what we talked about in the Thursday video. If it shows strength and volume over 1335, it probably would make it to at least this descending trend line, which is way up here. If you take a look at it, it's up here at 1550 almost. So honestly, it's the stock has it looks good to get all the way up to this trend line and even potentially breaking it. So we would look for a break of this trend line for any kind of positive change in trend in this stock. So I got out early. You could have absolutely stayed in this stock. It showed very good support. So after breaking through 1335, you can see it retested it, and then has continued higher. So pretty decent trade if you're still holding it. Great, good for you. I definitely got out early on this stock and made about, I'd say like maybe less than $1 on this. Yeah. So it was about 90 cents. I don't like holding stocks like this that are on earnings, based on earnings moves through a long weekend. So I try to get the meat of the move here early in the morning, try to get out of it before midday, the midday kind of doldrums set in. And that's just how I trade. I just like to get in and get out and get that like a little move that I, based on the analysis I made technically, and just, be done with it. So done with the AOBC. Next was, I believe, AMBA. Yeah. So AMBA, we talked about it potentially being weak. If you take a look at, let's just go to the 2-day 15-minute chart. Okay. So we talked about AMBA, gapping down quite a bit on earnings, and I had some pivots down here. 1339, we talked about being a potential level of support, right? Because it kind of punched through there and continued to show some stability around that area. So 1339, we talked about being a potential level of support based on the weekly chart. Let's go to the weekly chart of AMBA. Yeah. So we talked about 1339, which is this pivot right here, down here, and that's what we were talking about as some support. And it didn't actually get there again after the overnight. So the overnight session, you see it punched right down below it, and then it just kind of bounced hard off of that level, actually, all the way back up to the next pivot right before the open with 35.21. So I did say that I thought this would be a weak stock, but once it kind of showed that strength, I just kind of watched it. I actually got in the stock a little bit today because of the gap that it filled. So if we take a look at the daily chart, and you look at actually the and it's hard to see it on this chart. I'm trying to figure out how to show it. Okay, let's use the 15-minute chart. Nope, we're going to use the 5-minute chart. Okay, so in the morning, as this stock went, up through this 35.21 level, didn't get into it here, obviously, because I expected it to come back around and show some weakness. But it crossed through, so it had some, actually a 1-minute chart might be better. Yeah. So it showed some strength up to 37.10, and you can see it kind of popped above it and started coming down. So as it consolidated here in this like bullish flag pattern, this created kind of a gap. So if you looked at it on a daily, it would look like, and I'll just change it around so you could see it this way. If you looked at it on a daily, okay, the 35.21 is here, which means it would have been like, it would have been a little bar here. So like a bar underneath this 35.21, and it would have had a little spike on top of it, which is what this was. So as it started coming back, it consolidated and started curving back to the upside above this 37.25 level, which was the high of the day up to that point. It had this gap, right? So we do the same thing for short positions on a stock that gaps up. So we wait for the morning move, and then if there is a kind of consolidation below, like a spike high, we look for a potential for it to break that level and go up or go down on a stock that's up, and potentially could be coming down and filling the gap for the day, like the intraday gap, right? So the intraday gap would be the gap between the prior close. The prior close was up here at 39.73, and the high of the intraday high was right here in the morning at 37.25. So between 37.25 and actually we use the bottom. the bottom of this candle for the gap fill, 39.13. That's $2, and we were looking for a fill of the gap once it crossed back above this 37.25 line. So this is the entry point that we took right here at 37.30. We took it a little bit higher on 37.30, and actually the gap, as it filled the gap, you can see it tapped up, filled the gap, which is to the low of this candle right here, where the dashed line is. That's the gap fill. It tapped, and started coming down. So as it came down, we went ahead and sold it underneath this kind of consolidation range up here, this range, right up, as it was trying to break through this gap, go above this gap fill. It shows this little, it's a little range right here, right? Yeah. So as it crossed down below that range, this red bar here, we sold out of our position. So it wasn't a terribly profitable position. It was like $1.40 or so, $1.30 actually. So that's not very much of a, profit, but it was a profit, and it was strictly off of a gap fill, because it started showing some strength first thing in the morning. Like, it was definitely not looking good pre-market. It looked very weak, after earnings, but after it popped down to this 39 level and started, recovering like $2 in the pre-market, it was definitely a candidate for a trade to the upside. I am super conservative, so I did not catch this whole move. Like, if you wanted to trade it aggressively, you could have traded the first 5-minute or 15-minute high above that. You could have gotten in that trade way down here, and made another about 50 cents almost. From 35.70 ish to 37.30, so 60 cents. So you could have gotten into it a little bit better than I did. I definitely took the trade just to take the trade, and you can see here it even topped back. It even came back down all the way to my entry point, curled back up in a V pattern kind of, and has gone all the way up to this 40.60 level here. This pivot 40.06. So it actually did kind of a turnaround move even after the midday in the afternoon. So it was a pretty interesting little stock there, that went the exact opposite way that I thought it would go. And I tried to get in for a little bit of profit, and made a little bit, but could have made more, and probably didn't really need to take a trade on it at all. But because of the momentum and the fill of the gap, that's the reason that I took that trade, just for the gap fill. And usually, when stocks gap down and then start curving back up and go above that, that first like high of the day, like the high of the day, any kind of spike high of the day, it definitely could present an opportunity for a trade. So it was definitely not my typical trade, and I must say, it was a little bit of an over trade on my part. Like, I shouldn't have gotten into AMBA, but because ULTA didn't work out the way I wanted it to, meaning like it didn't go the direction I wanted, I did make a decent profit on LULU, and AOBC, but earnings trades are so few and far between. I really like to take advantage of that momentum, and there really wasn't any other trade out there that was working as well as LULU and AOBC, so decided to take a little chance on Ambarella. So let's move on to the last trade that we talked about. The last earnings trade was Ulta Beauty. And we talked about this being really weak. Like, I'm super surprised about I was very shocked in the morning to see the activity on Ulta pre-market. You can see here, this is the move that it made Thursday night. Gap down, like it got up to this level, this trend line, and gap down, and was it was recovering a little bit. And I thought it would recover maybe a little bit more, but I expected a turn down on this, a downturn on this stock. There was some news actually in the evening, in the early evening Thursday, about Kylie Jenner, who is a huge influencer in general with the young kids nowadays. They love Kylie, and also, whatever she does, kids are going to want to follow. So pretty right after, I think after earnings were released, towards like maybe an hour or so after that, 2 hours, she put out a tweet that she was going to be launching her makeup at Ulta, and I think it was like a 4 or something. So it was like right around here. Okay, so right around the time that the stock started popping back up, Kylie Jenner put that tweet out. So that's actually a pretty big binary kind of a mover. It will move the stock, and apparently it moved the stock a lot. So with that news, you can see in the pre-market, it just totally blew through the 2 trend lines we were talking about, these 2, and even started to just, it blew through this first trend line and started to go up over this 247.58 pivot. And then first thing in the morning, if you take a look at the 5-minute chart, actually, let's just take a look at the 1-minute chart, because this stock just blew it out of the park first thing. So yep, so as soon as the market opened, it just blew through this second trend line, which is a downtrend line, which is longer term from June 2017. And that's a breakout, right? So it's a breakout over this trend line. So I did not take a trade on this, but I did look at this afterwards and drew some indicators to where you could have taken a trade on this just based on that gap, because it actually gapped up in the morning. If you look at it technically, gap and go, right? This is a gap and go pattern. So it gapped up, busted through this trend line, and that would have been your indication to look for a continuation trend to the upside. Could have gotten in after the first 5-minute high. Right here is the first 5-minute bar. Right after the first 5-minute high, you could have gotten in, and you have pivots to the upside here. The first target would have been 260.40, and then the next target was all the way up at 274.37. It did not get there, and in fact, if you were to hold this stock using the 5-minute chart pattern, you would have see here. This is kind of like a reversal pattern up here, right? See this high up here at 268.88. It came down. It didn't come down all the way to your entry point, so you probably would have still held it. And then it made a lower high here at this second oval. And then that would have been an indication to sell the stock. So if you got in this stock going to the upside, those would have been, the potential entry and exit points on Ulta. And it actually, I was kind of, I don't like stocks that are going completely the opposite direction of my analysis based on news. So I didn't get into it, but it would have been a great stock to get into for a short-term trade to the upside. That's a good $12 that you could have made there on that stock move, just based on a tweet from Kylie Jenner. So just wanted to point that out. I was definitely wrong on that trade, but I think the news had something to do with it, honestly, because that stock was going down. And you can see this huge topping tail pattern on it too. It didn't make it above this 260.40 on the close, but it is above this longer term downtrend, so it could signal a trend change for this stock. Okay, next up is Grubhub. I had spoken about this on Thursday about getting short this stock via either a call spread or an outright put on this name if it got below the low of Thursday. The bar Thursday here. So it actually, once it started, it did make a move directly to the upside in the morning on Friday, but it started, reversing down and was moving towards the open. And I actually went ahead and got into a October 150, 165 call spread, selling that call spread when the stock was here at this level around 142.38. So right now, the spread is against me because the stock did move back up towards the latter part of the day. And it is still below this trend line, and it's below 150. So as long as it maintains this channel line here, I'm going to retain that position. And honestly, I could retain it until it started moving towards 150 even, because that's the beauty of the call spread being sold, right? So you have the ability to make money if the stock stays right where it is, if it goes down, or even if it goes up a little bit towards 150. So I have an October time frame. So that's 46 days away. So it has that much time to make the credit that you received on it. So the theta value, which is the time value of that option spread, will run out. Will continue to come out of that position and go towards your credit as the time passes towards that October time frame. So as long as it's below 150, we're profitable in that trade. And that's the way I decided to trade Grubhub, because really the underlying hypothesis of this particular trade was that the stock was going to stay below and within this channel, right? So I thought it might get below Thursday's low and continue to make this a down move similar to what it did right here, but it hasn't done that, and so I actually am in a better position here with the call spread versus the outright put on this stock. So I'm looking to, if it does start showing a little bit more weakness, I will probably get into it with a put as well. But I have a little credit already that will go towards any kind of put trade or short stock trade with my call spreads that I sold, the 150, 165 spreads. So that's Grubhub. We're still in it. It's not going in the direction I'd like, but we have time, so we're going to hold on to that trade for a few weeks at least. If it continues to show, some resistance at this level, this stock. All right, so the next one is EA Sports. We talked about EA being weak on Thursday. It had this huge gap down on Thursday based on some news, and it continued to move, on Friday down below this 114.88 pivot, which we talked about, and has started moving down even further below that, going down towards the 110 area and then the 105 pivot, and then of course the 100 area as well, which is a pivot. So what we talked about is if 114.88 acted as support for the stock, that we would potentially look for it for a bounce trade off of this 114.88 level. Since it immediately started showing weakness off the open and went down below 114.88, I went ahead and got into the position short. It wasn't right away, it wasn't right after the first minute or 5 minute bar, but I did get into it right here around 9:20 or so, right here at the 114.02 level, 114.01 level. So got into it a little bit later than I could have. I could have gotten into it right below the first 5 minute bar, which would have been just a little higher, 114.14. But I wanted it to make sure because, it had this little spike move here, and then, I wanted to see continuation to the downside. So I got in here. I'm still in the position with the put. I bought an 80 delta put out in October. So I have a put here, which I purchased at this time frame. So it did reverse back up to the 114.88 level, but you can see it acted as a level of resistance. So that's a good sign for a short position on this name. Going through that pivot, retracing and bouncing back down off of that pivot. It's acting as a support now versus a resistance now versus a support. So what we're going to use is today's high, Friday's high as our stop. So this 115.51 level right here, what this red dashed line will be our mental stop on this position. And it will need to make a move kind of soon to the downside for our position to be profitable, because it is a put. It's not shorting the stock outright, and it does have a component of time that we need to be aware of. So we'll hold EA for a few days to see how the move goes right now off this break. I anticipate, and what I'm thinking is it'll go down at least a couple more days, even if it's not big moves. There is a potential support here at the 110 level, just based on a couple of spiky areas in the chart, as well as it is a psychological level because it's a round number. So we'll look at 110 for a potential first target, and then go from there. And I think the best thing to do would be to just trail the stop down mentally, and make a note of where the stock is at any moment. So 110 could be, actually I'm going to go ahead and put the pivot on here so I have it right here where this, yep. So around 110.43. And so we'll look for that area to be our first target. And then if it crosses through there on volume, we'll hold the position and look for some support around 105. So that's EA as well. And those are the only two positions that I'm holding into the weekend, which is a long weekend, right, with Labor Day. And so those are the only two swing trades I have. We have, some stocks that we're watching still, and I guess I can go through those for you. We have a couple of stocks that we're watching for moves, and the first being Booking.com. This one we talked about, looking for it to show strength above this 1956.74 level, and if it did, that would be a potential gap fill situation. So we have this gap right here from 2040 to about 1956. So if this stock continues to be strong, and so right now it's got a little bit of lower volume than it showed during this down move here. So we're looking for a breach of this 1956.75 level into this gap. So if it does that, we'll look to get long very short term for a potential gap fill, or at least a potential partial gap fill up to this pivot here at 1985. And even potentially all the way up to the 2040 area. What my overall, theme or theory rather on Booking is that it will maybe turn back down to the downside and continue its move down towards this purple line, which is a longer term complex trend line. So that's my theory on Booking. It may not do that. It is showing some strength on the weekly. You can see it's making a move similar to this move here, where it did go up and show some strength off of this double bottom area here. It's not really a double bottom, but this on the bars it's like two opposite bars with really big candles. So that signaled a change into the trend, right, from a down to an uptrend. So it could be doing that right now, and it's possible. So we'll look for that. We'll look to take advantage of that gap fill if it happens. And if not, we'll look for continued weakness on this longer term uptrend line here, the red trend line, the thick line. And then look for a break of this shorter term trend line for continuation down to this 1870 pivot, and then we have all these other pivots drawn here, so where your targets are. But Booking is, it is a V. It is kind of showing a V pattern here, recovery from this, from its earnings move to the downside. So it could potentially, pop up through 1956. But I anticipate it may consolidate around here and then turn back down. So we're looking at Booking still, no trade there just yet. And then I think we're looking at Zillow as well. Yep. So we have Zillow on our watch list also, for a similar type of thesis there. So Zillow did show some strength on Friday. It was up about 0.89%, and is still below actually the trend line. So you see the trend line on the left side on the 5-minute chart. It's still above here at 49.05 area. So we're still looking for potential weakness at this trend line, and if it doesn't manage to get up above this trend line and instead turns to the downside, we'll look for a short on this stock as well. So we're still watching Zillow. Still hasn't given us an entry point yet because it is showing some strength. We have a higher low here, so we're going to have to look for a break of this area here to take any kind of trade. So thanks for tuning in. Have a great weekend, the rest of your Labor Day weekend, and happy trading. If you are interested in knowing when my next video is coming out, please hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much, and happy trading.